I'm Isabelle Hartwell, 34, and for 8 years. I was dismissed as nothing more than my late husband's beautiful accessory. At his funeral last Tuesday, I heard the whispers, gold digger, trophy wife, she'd be lost without his money. The family I'd tried so hard to belong to stood in their black designer clothes, discussing my husband's estate as if I were invisible. Already planning how to divide what they assumed was rightfully theirs, but when that decorated general approached my husband's casket, removed his cap, and gave me the most respectful salute I'd ever witnessed, the room fell silent. What they discovered about my life before marriage and the truth I'd kept hidden to protect the man I loved would shatter every assumption they'd made about me. If you've ever been underestimated by those who should have valued you most, this story is for you. Subscribe to hear how one moment of recognition changed everything. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. I stood there, frozen, as General Morrison's weathered hand remained pressed to his forehead in that perfect military salute. My heart hammered against my ribs, and somewhere deep in my chest, something I'd buried for 8 long years began to stir. "Isabelle," my sister-in-law whispered, her voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "What is he doing?" I couldn't answer. I couldn't breathe. The general's eyes met mine over my husband's casket, and in them I saw recognition, respect, and something else, gratitude. When he finally lowered his hand, he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small white envelope. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in uniform, "this is long overdue." The envelope felt heavy in my trembling fingers. Inside, a simple condolence card bore handwritten words that made my knees nearly buckle. "Thank you for your service and sacrifice. Your country remembers." My husband's family stared at me like I'd grown a second head. His mother, usually so composed in her Chanel suit, looked genuinely confused for the first time since I'd known her. His brother stepped forward, that familiar, entitled expression creeping across his face. "General, I think there's been some mistake," he said with his practiced lawyer's smile. "Isabelle has never served in any capacity that would warrant no mistake," General Morrison interrupted, his tone brooking no argument. He turned back to me, and for a moment I was 26 again, standing in a briefing room in Baghdad. Captain Hartwell was one of the finest officers I ever had the privilege to serve alongside. Captain, the word hit the room like a physical force. I hadn't heard my rank spoken aloud in 8 years, and the sound of it made my spine straighten. Instinctively, "That's impossible," my mother-in-law breathed. She was a secretary when Thomas met her. The general's expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tightening around his eyes. He knew, just as I did, how carefully constructed that lie had been, how necessary it had been. As the funeral director gently suggested, we moved to allow other mourners to pay their respects, I felt the weight of 18 pairs of eyes boring into me. The whispers started immediately, not the cruel assumptions from before, but confused, urgent questions. The reception afterward was torture. Every conversation stopped when I approached. I escaped to the garden behind the funeral home, needing air, needing space. The general found me there. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I couldn't let you stand there and listen to them diminish what you are." I turned to face him, this man who had seen me at my strongest and now witnessed me at my most vulnerable. "It's been 8 years, General. I'm not that person anymore." He shook his head. "Once a soldier, always a soldier. That doesn't change. Just because you hang up the uniform, they're going to want answers," I said. "Then maybe it's time to give them some." That night, alone in the house that had been ours but now felt impossibly empty, I climbed the stairs to our bedroom and opened my jewelry box for the first time in years with real purpose. Beneath the pearls he'd given me for our anniversary, under the diamond earrings that were supposed to make me look the part of a successful man's wife, my fingers found them. Cold metal against warm skin, 2 small rectangles that had once meant everything to me. I lifted the dog tags into the lamplight, and the engraved letters seemed to pulse with their own life. Hartwell, Isabelle M., Captain, Military Intelligence, blood type, O-neg. 8 years ago, I was a different person entirely. Captain Isabelle Hartwell had been 26, sharp as a blade and absolutely certain of her purpose in the world. I had graduated summa cum laude from Georgetown with degrees in international relations and Arabic studies, then sailed through officer candidate school like I was born for it, which, in many ways, I was. By the time I was deployed to Iraq in 2015, I was already being fast-tracked for major intelligence operations. I spoke 4 languages fluently, could analyze geopolitical situations with surgical precision, and had an intuitive understanding of human psychology that made me invaluable in the field. The mission that changed everything began with a manila folder marked classified landing on my desk in Baghdad. Operation Sandglass Intelligence had located a high-value target planning coordinated. Attacks on 3 American diplomatic facilities across the Middle East. The attacks were scheduled for the same day, designed to overwhelm our response capabilities and maximize casualties. My job was to infiltrate the terrorist cell's communication network, identify the specific attack plans, and coordinate with local assets to neutralize the threat. It meant going deep undercover in hostile territory with no backup and no safety net. For 68 hours, I lived among people who would have killed me without hesitation if they'd known who I really was. I attended their planning meetings, memorized their attack schedules, and slowly, carefully, gathered the intelligence that would save hundreds of lives. When I finally made contact with our extraction team, I had everything we needed. The attacks were thwarted, the terrorists captured, and not a single American life was lost. When the first returned stateside, I was awarded a classified commendation and promoted to major. On paper, I was a rising star with unlimited potential. In reality, I was a 27-year-old woman who jumped at unexpected sounds and couldn't maintain a relationship because I'd forgotten how to be vulnerable with another human being. That's when I met Thomas. Thomas entered my life during what the military politely called my transition period. I was stationed at the Pentagon working in strategic analysis, trying to convince myself that a desk job could satisfy the part of me that had thrived on fieldwork. The assignment seemed routine enough: provide security consultation for diplomatic receptions hosted by defense contractors. Thomas owned one of those contractors, a company specializing in communication technologies. He was brilliant, successful, and unlike anyone I'd ever met. He actually listened when I spoke. Our first real conversation happened during a reception at the Kennedy Center. "You look like someone wrestling with big decisions," he said, joining me at the terrace railing. I should have given him the standard polite deflection. Instead, something about his genuine concern made me honest. "I'm trying to figure out if I can be happy doing the safe thing instead of the right thing. What if those aren't mutually exclusive?" That question haunted me for weeks. When he asked me to dinner, I almost said no. Dating was complicated enough without the added layer of security clearances and classified backgrounds. But Thomas was patient. He understood that there were parts of my life I couldn't discuss, stories I couldn't share, achievements I couldn't claim. The problem came when he invited me to meet his family. I'll never forget that first dinner at his mother's house. The Hartwell family had money, tradition, and very specific ideas about the kind of woman suitable for their golden son. "So, Isabelle," his mother said over the salad course, "Thomas tells us you work in consulting. What kind of consulting?" I had prepared for this question, worked with my security officer to develop a cover story. "Government efficiency consulting," I said smoothly. "I help agencies streamline their communication processes." It wasn't entirely a lie. I did work on communication, just the kind that prevented international incidents. "How interesting," his sister-in-law murmured with the kind of smile that wasn't really a smile. "And where did you go to school?" "Georgetown." That part was true. Wonderful school. "What did you study?" This was where the deception deepened. Business administration with a focus on organizational psychology. Another carefully constructed lie. My actual degrees were in international relations and Arabic studies, but those subjects raised questions I couldn't answer. The evening continued like that teach question, requiring another small deception, another layer of fictional identity. By dessert, I had created an entirely new version of myself, Isabelle, the harmless government consultant. Thomas walked me to my car afterward, and I could see the apology in his eyes. "They'll warm up to you," he said. "They just need time to see what I see." But what did he see? The real me, or the carefully constructed fiction I'd presented? The fake resume I'd crafted for that dinner became my biography for the next 8 years. Government efficiency consultant, Georgetown business graduate, a woman with no remarkable achievements, no classified commendations, no life or death decisions in her past. It was easier that way. Safer. Thomas's family could accept a boring consultant. They would never have accepted a decorated military officer who'd saved hundreds of lives but couldn't talk about it. In it, I'm radiant in white silk, Thomas beaming beside me. But if you know what to look for, you can see the truth beneath the surface. My posture is too perfect, my shoulders too square, my smile too controlled. Even on the happiest day of my life, I couldn't completely shed the bearing of a military officer. Thomas knew, of course. He held me as I cried for the woman I was leaving behind. "I'll never ask you to be less than you are," he promised. Judgments, the family gatherings were the worst. Every holiday, every birthday, every celebration became an exercise in endurance. Listening to conversations about shopping and charity galas, "Isabelle, you're so quiet," his mother would say, with that practiced concern. That felt more like criticism. "Surely, you have something to contribute to the conversation. What could I contribute? Compared to the geopolitical implications of recent developments in Syria, I learned to nod and smile and offer safe, forgettable comments about the weather or the food. I became an expert at deflection, at steering conversations toward topics where my supposed background as a government consultant might be relevant without being interesting. The worst part wasn't their dismissal, it was watching Thomas struggle with it. A joke about keeping the wives entertained while the men talked business. I watched Thomas's jaw tighten. Later, at home, he exploded. "I can't stand the way they treat you. But that's what I am to them," I said quietly. "That's what I have to be." "No, it's not. You're brilliant. You're accomplished, but they can't know." I took his hands in mine. We agreed on this. My past stays buried. Some nights when Thomas was working late and the house felt too quiet, I would find myself standing in front of the mirror, practicing normal expressions. To ask innocuous questions, Thomas tried to create spaces where I could be myself. "Just because you can't use it doesn't mean you should lose it," he would say. But slowly, inevitably, I began to lose pieces of situations, began deferring to others on what wine to serve with dinner. By our 7th, I had become so good at being what everyone expected that I sometimes forgot who I used to be underneath it all. General Morrison had not planned to attend Thomas's funeral. He told me later that he'd seen the obituary in the Washington Post and spent 24 hours wrestling with whether to pay his respects. The Thomas Hartwell mentioned in the article was a successful defense contractor, survived by his beloved wife Isabelle. There was no mention of any military connection, but something about the name nagged at him when he cross-referenced it with his old files. My maiden name surfaced, Captain Isabelle Morrison, no relation, despite the shared surname, who had served under his command during some of the most dangerous operations of the Iraq conflict. He almost didn't come. Protocol suggested he shouldn't. I had clearly chosen a civilian life, had buried my military identity so completely that even my husband's obituary made no mention of it. Then he remembered Baghdad, 2016. I had requested a private meeting with him 3 days after Operation Sandglass concluded successfully. "Sir, I need to discuss my future with the service," I had said without preamble. He'd been expecting this conversation. Operations like Sandglass left marks, and he'd seen promising officers wash out after experiencing the psychological toll of deep cover work. "I want to continue serving, sir, but I need to request reassignment to stateside operations only." "May I ask why, Captain?" For the first time since he'd known me, I had hesitated. "I've been offered a position with a defense contractor. The owner, Thomas Hartwell, has asked me to marry him." General Morrison had dealt with military marriages for 30 years, but this situation was unique. Thomas Hartwell's company held several classified contracts. Having a military intelligence officer as a spouse could create conflicts of interest. "Captain, you understand that marrying someone in the defense, contracting business while maintaining your current clearance level could be complicated." "Yes, sir. That's why I'm requesting reassignment to domestic analysis. I want to serve my country and build a life with this man, but I won't compromise either." He'd approved the transfer, but 6 months later I had submitted my resignation. Entirely, the official reason was listed as pursuing civilian opportunities, but he'd suspected there was more to the story. Standing in the funeral home that Tuesday, watching Thomas's family dismiss me with their whispered comments about trophy wives and gold diggers, General Morrison finally understood what had really happened. I hadn't just left the service, I had erased myself from it. In his briefcase he carried a folder he'd brought on impulse, my classified service record, recently declassified after years of bureaucratic processing. Inside was the official commendation for Operation Sandglass. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the face of enemy action, Captain Hartwell's actions directly prevented the deaths of an estimated 347 American personnel and civilians." Watching me stand beside my husband's casket, accepting condolences with the same composed dignity I'd shown under enemy fire, General Morrison made a decision that violated every protocol he'd ever learned. He approached the casket, removed his service cap, and gave me the salute I should have received 8 years ago. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I had barely finished serving coffee to the last of the funeral guests when Thomas's brother appeared in the kitchen doorway. His wife closed behind him. His mother followed, still elegant in her black Armani suit, but with something predatory in her eyes that I hadn't seen before. "We need to talk," he said without preamble. I set down the coffee pot carefully, buying myself a moment to think. 8 years of pretending to be someone else had taught me to read situations quickly, and everything about their body language screamed confrontation. "Of course," I said, gesturing toward the living room. "Would you like to sit?" "This is fine," his mother said crisply. "We won't be long." They arranged themselves in a semicircle facing me, like a tribunal. I remained standing, instinctively positioning myself near the kitchen island where I had multiple exit routes if needed. Old habits. What did that general mean? His sister-in-law demanded. All that talk about service and sacrifice? I kept my expression neutral, the way I'd learned to do during hostile interrogations. General Morrison was being kind. Thomas did significant work with defense contractors. Don't? His brother's voice cut through my deflection like a blade. Don't insult our intelligence, Isabelle. The man saluted you. Military personnel don't salute civilian consultants. I could feel the walls I'd built around my true identity beginning to crack under their scrutiny. I think you're reading too much into a gesture of respect. Are you lying to us? His mother asked quietly, and something in her tone made my spine straighten automatically. Have you been lying to us for 8 years? The question hung in the air like smoke. I looked at each of their faces, suspicious, angry, demanding answers, and realized I was facing a choice I'd hoped never to make. I've never lied about anything that mattered, I said carefully. Everything matters now, his brother snapped. Thomas is dead and you're his heir. We have a right to know who we're dealing with. You're dealing with his wife. That hasn't changed. His sister-in-law laughed, but there was no humor in it. His wife, who apparently has some kind of military background, she's never mentioned. What else haven't you told us, Isabelle? I felt the familiar calm descend over me. The same emotional shutdown that had kept me alive during my years in intelligence. When people became hostile, I became ice. I told you what you needed to know, and what we needed to know was that you were a nobody, his mother said with surgical precision. A harmless little consultant who was lucky enough to catch our son's eye. But if you were military, if you had your own career, your own achievements. She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I understood perfectly. Where is it? His brother asked suddenly. Where is what? Your service record? Your discharge papers? If you were military, there would be documentation. My heart rate increased, but my expression remained steady. I don't know what you're talking about. But they were already moving. His brother headed toward Thomas's study, while his wife went upstairs toward our bedroom. They were going through our private things, searching for evidence of the life I'd buried. Found something, his brother called from the study. My blood turned to ice. They emerged carrying a manila folder I'd never seen before. Labeled with Thomas's handwriting, important documents, IH. Inside were photocopies of military records, heavily redacted but unmistakably official. My rank, my unit designation, fragments of commendations with most of the details blacked out for security reasons. They studied the documents in silence, their expressions shifting from suspicion to shock to something that looked almost like fear. Captain, his mother read aloud. Military intelligence, multiple classified commendations. She looked up at me with completely new eyes. You were an officer. I said nothing, but my silence was answer enough. The accusations came fast and brutal. You manipulated him, his sister-in-law snarled, waving the redacted documents like weapons. You used your military training to what? Seduce him? Extract information about his business? You're a spy, his brother added, his lawyer's mind jumping to the most dramatic conclusion. You married Thomas to gain access to classified defense contracts. I stood there, letting their words wash over me like acid rain, feeling pieces of my carefully constructed identity dissolving with each poisonous syllable. You've been hiding SS, his mother said with cold certainty. Military pensions, disability payments, who knows what else. And now you think you can just inherit everything while keeping your own resources secret? Stop. The word came out harder than I intended, with enough authority that they actually fell silent. For just a moment, Captain Hartwell surfaced through the cracks in Isabelle the trophy wife's facade. But they weren't done. His brother stepped closer, his face flushed with righteous anger. We're going to contest the will. We're going to investigate. Every aspect of your background. You're not going to steal our family's legacy. That's when I broke. Not the way I'd imagined I might break, not with tears or pleading or desperate explanations. I broke the way a dam breaks, suddenly, completely, and with devastating force. Your family's legacy. The words came out in a voice I hadn't used. In 8 years, carrying the kind of authority that had once commanded rooms full of colonels and diplomats, let me tell you about legacy. I strode to the study, past their shocked faces, and pulled open the bottom drawer of Thomas's desk. Hidden beneath financial documents, I found what I was looking for. Another envelope? This one marked with my name in Thomas's careful handwriting. Inside were papers I'd never seen draft. Divorce documents that were never filed. Dated just 6 months after our wedding. Attached was a letter in Thomas's hand, sealed but never sent. My fingers trembled as I opened it and read words that felt like a knife to my heart. My darling Isabelle, I've watched you sacrifice everything that made you extraordinary to fit into my world, and I can't stand it anymore. I've prepared these papers not because I don't love you, but because I love you too much to watch you disappear completely. You were never meant to be anyone's trophy. You were meant to be a force of nature. The letter was dated 2 weeks before he'd taken me to Tuscany for our first anniversary, where he'd promised he would never ask me to be less than I was. Below the letter was another document, a revised will, also never filed, that would have left me only a modest inheritance while protecting the majority of his assets for his family. But there was a note attached. Changed my mind after seeing her choose love over liberation. She deserves everything. The room was dead silent as I finished reading. When I looked up, Thomas's family was staring at me with expressions ranging from confusion to something that might have been shame. He was going to divorce me, I said quietly, holding up the papers. 6 months after our wedding, he was going to set me free because he realized what I was giving up, but I chose to stay. Not for his money, not for his status. I stayed because I loved him enough to become someone smaller if that's what our marriage required. His mother reached for the documents with shaking hands. As she read, her face went through transformations I'd never seen before. But why? She whispered. Why would someone with your background choose to what? To pretend to be nobody special? To let you all treat me like an accessory for 8 years? I laughed, but there was no humor in it, because the man I loved asked me to be patient while you got to know me. And I thought that if you loved me for who you believed I was, it would be more genuine than if you respected me for what I'd accomplished. But we didn't love you, his mother said, with brutal honesty. We tolerated you. We dismissed you. No, I agreed. You didn't know, because I made sure you didn't. Because Thomas asked me to be patient with you, and I thought protecting his relationship with his family was worth sacrificing my own identity. I folded the documents carefully and slipped them back into their envelope. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. You want to know about assets? I asked quietly. You want to contest the will based on what you think I've hidden from you, then let's talk about what I actually gave up to be here. The next morning, I made a phone call I'd been avoiding for 8 years. Pentagon Personnel Records, Classification Review Board. This is Major Isabelle Hartwell, requesting expedited declassification review for Operation Sandglass, file number Sierra-Alpha-7-7-9. Within an hour, I had confirmation that my service record had been cleared for public release, pending final review. 3 days later, a courier delivered a thick manila envelope to my door. Inside were documents that told the story I'd been forbidden to share for nearly a decade. Operation Sandglass, classified mission report, final status. Declassified for public release date October 15th to 18th, 2016. Commanding Officer, General Patricia Morrison. Primary Operative, Major Isabelle Hartwell. Military Intelligence Mission Overview. Intelligence sources identified coordinated terrorist attack planned against 3 American diplomatic facilities. Estimated casualties, 347 American personnel and civilians. Timeframe, 72 hours. Operative deployment, Major Hartwell volunteered for deep cover infiltration of terrorist cell. Operating under cover identity, Amira Khalil. Lebanese journalist. Mission parameters: gather intelligence on attack plans, coordinate with local assets for prevention. Mission execution, Major Hartwell successfully infiltrated target organization and gathered complete intelligence on attack methodology and timing. Information provided led to successful prevention of all 3 planned attacks. 0 American casualties. Commendation for extraordinary heroism and distinguished service in the face of enemy action. Major Hartwell's actions directly prevented the deaths of an estimated 347 American personnel and civilians. I read the document 3 times, holding in my hands the official validation of the most important thing I'd ever done. 347 lives. Students studying abroad in Turkey, embassy workers in Lebanon, consulate staff in Jordan. That afternoon, I called Thomas's family and asked them to come over. When they arrived, I handed each of them a copy of the declassified report without saying a word. I watched their faces as they read. Watched his mother's hand rise to cover her mouth when she reached the casualty estimates. Watched his brother's expression change from skepticism to awe. Watched his sister-in-law sink into a chair as the full weight of what she was reading hit her. 347 people, his mother whispered. 347 people who went home to their families because of what you did, his brother added, his voice thick with emotion I'd never heard from him before. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then his sister-in-law looked up at me with tears in her eyes. We called you a trophy wife? I nodded. You did, but you were saving lives. I was doing my job. No, his mother said firmly. standing up with the dignity I'd always admired in her. This wasn't just a job. This was heroism. She approached me slowly, as if I might disappear if she moved too quickly. Isabelle, I owe you an apology that I don't know how to make. We've spent 8 years treating you like you were nothing special. When you were, you are. I'm the same person I was yesterday, I said quietly. No, you're not. This from his brother, who was studying the report with his lawyer's attention to detail. Yesterday, we thought we knew who you were. Today, we realize we never knew you at all. His sister-in-law stood up suddenly. The things we said to you yesterday, and for 8 years, the way we talked about you, the assumptions we made. You made those assumptions because I let you. I interrupted, because it was easier than explaining why I couldn't talk about my real background. But we didn't love you, his mother said with brutal honesty. We tolerated you, we dismissed you, we treated you like an inconvenience. I looked at each of their faces, stricken, ashamed, struggling to process the magnitude of their misjudgment. The question now, I said, is what we do with the truth. Word travels fast in military circles. Within a week of my service record being declassified, my phone started ringing. Hartwell, you magnificent bastard, he said when I answered, using the old nickname with obvious affection. I just heard about Operation Sandglass going public. About damn time. Captain Rodriguez from Fort Bragg, Lieutenant Commander Washington from Norfolk. One by one, people from my past reached out, each carrying a piece of the professional identity I'd buried 8 years ago. A young black woman in dress blues stood on my front porch. She'd rehearsed this moment multiple times. Ma'am, I'm SFC Williams from the 82nd Airborne. I was wondering if I could have a moment of your time. I invited her in, and she sat stiffly on the edge of my living room sofa, the wooden box balanced carefully on her knees. Ma'am, I was deployed to Ramadi in 2017, about 6 months after Operation Sandglass. Our unit was briefed on terrorist communication patterns. This one bore the inscription, Operation Sandglass Heroes. Remember heroes, along with coordinates I recognized as the location of the warehouse where I'd gathered the final intelligence. The intelligence you provided helped us identify 3 more cells using similar communication methods. We were able to neutralize threats that could have killed hundreds more Americans. My unit wanted you to have this. I took the coin with hands that weren't quite steady. It was warm from her grip, solid and real in a way that made the past week feel less like a surreal dream. Thank you, I managed. This means more than you know. After she left, I sat holding the coin and thinking about the strange nature of military service. For 8 years I'd been cut off from that family, isolated by classification requirements and my own choices. Now, suddenly, I was being welcomed back. A package arrived from my old unit in Germany, a plaque bearing my name and rank, along with signatures from every member of my former team. Club most meaningful was the visit from General Morrison herself. She arrived unannounced on a Saturday morning, driving herself in a small sedan that seemed too modest for someone of her rank. I should have pushed for declassification years ago, she said without preamble, as I led her to the kitchen for coffee. It was my choice, I replied. The question caught me off guard. I'd spent so long focused on what Thomas needed, what his family could accept, what would cause the least disruption, that I'd almost forgotten to consider my own needs. I needed to know that what I did mattered, I said finally. That those 347 people lived because I was willing to do something dangerous. General Morrison nodded. And now, intelligence you provided helped us identify 3 more cells using similar communication methods. We were able to neutralize threats that could have killed hundreds more Americans. My unit, her voice caught slightly. My unit wanted you to have this. We know you probably can't display it publicly, but we wanted you to know, that we remember. I took the coin with hands that weren't quite steady. It was warm from her grip, solid and real in a way that made the past week feel less like a surreal dream. Thank you, I managed. After she left, I sat holding the coin and thinking about the strange nature of military service. We were a family scattered across the globe, bound by shared experiences that civilians couldn't understand. For 8 years, I'd been cut off from that family, isolated by classification requirements and my own choices. Now, suddenly, I was being welcomed back. The outpouring of support continued for days. A package arrived from my old unit in Germany, a plaque bearing my name and rank, along with signatures from every member of my former team. A group of female officers I'd mentored early in my career organized a dinner in my honor at the Army-Navy Club. Most meaningful was the visit from General Morrison herself. She arrived unannounced on a Saturday morning, driving herself in a small sedan that seemed too modest for someone of her rank. I should have pushed for declassification years ago, she said without preamble, as I led her to the kitchen for coffee. I knew what hiding your service record was costing you personally. It was my choice, I replied. I'd spent so long focused on what Thomas needed, what his family could accept, what would, 'cause the least disruption, that I'd almost forgotten to consider my own needs. I needed to know that what I did mattered, I said finally, that those 347 people lived because I was willing to do something dangerous. General Morrison nodded. And now I need to figure out who I am when I'm not hiding who I used to be. The envelope from my financial advisor arrived the same day as the challenge coin, though it took me 3 days to work up the courage to open it. For 8 years, I'd lived as Thomas's dependent, using his credit cards, spending his money, accepting his generosity without contributing financially to our household, but the reality was far more complicated. When I left the military, I hadn't just walked away from a career I'd walked away from substantial accumulated wealth. Military intelligence. Officers deployed to combat zones receive hazard pay, tax-free income, and accelerated promotion opportunities. The financial statement confirmed what I'd tried not to think about for nearly a decade. My personal accounts, left untouched during my marriage, had grown substantially through careful investments. Current balance, $847,000, nearly $1 million that Thomas's family knew nothing about, money I'd earned through my own service and sacrifice. But there was more. Buried in the portfolio, details were investments I'd forgotten about, defense contractor stocks I'd purchased based on my insider knowledge of military procurement needs, technology company shares I'd bought after seeing classified reports about emerging threats. My phone rang. Thomas's brother, Isabelle, we need to talk. Our lawyers have been researching your background for the will contest. We found some interesting financial records. My stomach dropped. What kind of records? Tax returns, military pay statements, investment accounts. Isabelle, you're wealthy, independently, significantly wealthy. I closed my eyes. Yes. An hour later, I sat in the formal living room of the Hartwell family estate. My financial statements spread on the coffee table between us like evidence in a trial. Thomas's mother sat across from me, her expression complicated shame, confusion, and something that might have been respect. You've been paying for things, she said without preamble. The accountant found irregular deposits into Thomas's business accounts. Large ones, going back years. I nodded. Thomas was proud. He wouldn't have accepted direct financial help. His company hit rough patches during the defense spending. Cuts in 2018 and 2019, I made sure he had access. 2 additional capital through anonymous investor shell companies I set up to protect his pride. His brother leaned forward. How much? Over the years, about $200,000. His sister-in-law made a small sound of surprise. You were supporting us? The whole time we were treating you like a parasite, you were actually supporting the family. Thomas's mother stood and walked to the window, her posture rigid with barely controlled emotion. You've been protective of your family, I corrected. I understand that. She turned to face me. No, Isabelle, we've been monstrous. We saw a beautiful woman married to our successful son, and we assumed the worst. The accountant's report lay between us like a confession. Years of charitable donations to veteran organizations, substantial contributions to military family support groups, anonymous scholarships for children of fallen soldiers. The veteran charities, his brother said, studying the documents. You've donated almost $100,000 over 8 years. Military families need support. I was in a position to provide it. But you couldn't claim credit, his mother said with sudden understanding, because that would have raised questions about where the money came from. His sister-in-law picked up a bank statement showing monthly automatic transfers to the Gold Star Families Foundation. You've been taking care of other people this whole time? Other military families, other widows, other children who lost parents in combat? Thomas's mother returned to her seat, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked vulnerable and uncertain. We owe you more than an apology, she said. We owe you acknowledgement of who you are and what you've sacrificed, not just for the country, but for this family. She reached across the coffee table and took my hands in hers. We want to make this right, Isabelle, if you'll let us. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, slipped under my front door sometime during the night. I found it when I went to retrieve the morning newspaper. A cream-colored envelope with my name written in careful script across the front. Inside, 3 pages of handwriting that grew increasingly emotional as it progressed. Dear Isabelle, I was the worst to you. I know that. I was the one who made cutting remarks at dinner parties. I was the one who rolled my eyes when you spoke. I was the one who whispered to friends about Thomas's trophy wife. I don't know how to begin this letter, because I don't know how to apologize for 8 years of cruelty disguised as family protection. I've started writing this 17 times, and each time I realize that words aren't sufficient for what I need to say to you. I need you to understand that my behavior came from a place of deep insecurity, though that doesn't excuse it. When Thomas brought you to that first family dinner, you were everything I wasn't. Poised, intelligent, beautiful, in an effortless way that made me feel clumsy and ordinary by comparison. Instead of admiring those qualities, I felt threatened by them. Instead of welcoming you into our family, I decided you were a threat to be neutralized. The worst part is that you made it so easy. You never fought back, never defended yourself, never put me in my place the way you could have. You just absorbed every slight with grace, which somehow made me angrier. Now I understand why. You weren't a gold digger. You were a decorated military officer who had saved hundreds of lives and accumulated your own substantial wealth. You weren't threatened by my petty attacks because you'd faced actual enemies, real danger, life and death. Situations that put family squabbles into perspective. The revelation about your military service has forced me to confront some ugly truths about myself. I spent 8 years being jealous of a woman who had sacrificed her identity to protect classified operations. I was cruel to someone who had risked her life for strangers. But more than that, I realize now that you could have destroyed me at any point. With your intelligence background, you probably knew things about me, about all of us, that we never suspected. You could have made me look foolish in front of others, could have put me in my place with surgical precision. But you chose not to. I think we could have been friends, real friends. I think you could have been the sister I never had if I'd been mature enough to see past my own insecurities. I know this letter doesn't undo 8 years of mistreatment, but I needed you to know that I see you. Now really see you, and I'm horrified by my own blindness. You deserved better from me. From all of us. If you're willing, I'd like to try again. Not to assuage my guilt, but because I genuinely want to. No, the real Isabelle Hartwell. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I hope someday you might give me the chance to prove that I can be better than the person I've been. With deep respect and sincere regret, Catherine. I read the letter twice, then set it on the kitchen counter, and made myself coffee with hands that weren't quite steady. The apology was more thorough and more emotionally honest than I'd expected. My phone buzzed with a text message. Did you get my letter? I understand if you don't want to respond, but if you're willing to talk, I'm free whenever you are. Catherine. I stared at the message for a long time, remembering 8 years of small cruelties and casual dismissals. But I also remembered the look on her face when she'd read my service record: shock, shame, and something that looked like genuine remorse. Everyone deserved a chance to grow, to change, to become better than they'd been. I picked up my phone and typed back, "Coffee tomorrow at 10. I know a place." Her response came immediately. "Yes, thank you. I won't let you down." The phone call from the Washington Herald came on a Thursday morning while I was still processing Catherine's letter and preparing for our coffee meeting. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Jennifer Kim from the Herald. I'm calling about your military service record that was recently declassified. Would you be willing to speak with us about Operation Sandglass?" My first instinct was to hang up. 8 years of hiding had conditioned me to avoid any attention. But then I remembered that the need for secrecy was over. "What kind of story are you planning to write?" I asked carefully. "A feature about unsung heroes in our community. Your neighbors have no idea they're living next door to someone who saved hundreds of lives." The article appeared 3 days later. On the front page of the Sunday edition, "Hidden Hero Among Us, Military Officer's Secret Sacrifice." The headline made me cringe, but the story itself was respectful and accurate. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone rang constantly with calls from veterans organizations, civic groups, and local news stations wanting interviews. Neighbors I'd exchanged polite waves with for years knocked on my door to express their amazement and gratitude. The mailbox filled with letters from strangers, thanking me for my service. But it was the call from Margaret Stevens that meant the most. "Is this Isabelle Hartwell, the woman from the newspaper article?" "Yes. My son was stationed at the embassy in Lebanon in 2016. He was supposed to be working the day those attacks were planned." Her voice broke slightly. "Because of what you did, he came home. He's married now, with 2 little girls." I just wanted to say thank you. I found myself crying into the phone, overwhelmed by the connection between my actions and this woman's joy. For 8 years, Operation Sandglass had been an abstract achievement. Now, suddenly it had faces and families attached to it. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars Post invited me to speak at their monthly meeting. I hadn't addressed a group in my professional capacity since leaving the military, and I was nervous as I stood before 60 veterans and their families. "I didn't expect to be sharing this story," I began. "For 8 years, I couldn't talk about the most important thing I'd ever done. I lived in your community as someone ordinary, unremarkable, just another suburban wife with no particular achievements." Murmurs of understanding rippled through the audience. Many of them had their own stories of classified service. But I learned something during those 8 years of silence. The value of what we do isn't diminished by whether other people know about it. The lives we save, the threats we neutralize, the peace we protect, it all matters whether we get credit or not. After the speech, a young Marine approached me, still in uniform. "Ma'am, I'm deploying to Syria next month. Intelligence gathering." "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "Fear keeps you sharp," I told him. "Use it, trust your training, and remember that every piece of intelligence you gather, every risk you take, it ripples out in ways you'll never see." He straightened his shoulders. "Yes, ma'am." As I watched him walk away, I realized something had shifted inside me. For 8 years, I'd been mourning the loss of my military identity, feeling disconnected from the purpose that had once driven me. But purpose wasn't something I'd lost, it was something I'd temporarily set aside. The newspaper article had opened a door I hadn't realized I was ready to walk through. For the first time since my marriage, I began to consider what it might mean to reclaim not just my past achievements, but my future potential. That night, I called General Morrison. "I've been thinking about what you said," I told her, "about figuring out who I am when I'm not hiding who I used to be. And what have you figured out? That maybe hiding is over? That maybe it's time to use what I learned in both phases of my life, military and civilian, to do something meaningful." "Again, I was hoping you'd say that," she replied, "because I have a proposition for you." The call came from Thomas's business partner, David Brennan, the day after the newspaper article was published. I'd met David dozens of times at company events, where he'd always been polite but distant, treating me like the decorative spouse I'd appeared to be. "Isabelle, I need to see you urgently. There are documents Thomas left that I think you should review." We met at his downtown office, where David spread a series of partnership agreements and strategic planning documents across his conference table. The papers were stamped with dates going back to early in my marriage, and my maiden name appeared throughout them. "I never understood these before," David said, pointing to a clause buried in the third page of their partnership agreement. "Thomas insisted on bringing in a strategic consultant for international operations, but he would never tell me who it was. He called them IM Consulting, said it was for security reasons." I stared at the documents with growing comprehension. "I am Isabelle Morrison, my maiden name." "You," David continued, "you were the consultant. All those strategic recommendations that helped us navigate the Middle East contracts, the intelligence about political instabilities that kept us from making disastrous investments, the analysis of defense spending trends that positioned us ahead of our competitors, that was you. The evidence was all there in black and white. Consulting fees paid to IM Consulting, rooted through a shell company I'd set up to protect Thomas's reputation, and my own security clearance requirements. Strategic reports authored under the pseudonym, each one bearing insights that only someone with my intelligence background could have provided." "The Algeria contract," David said, pulling out a thick file. "In 2019, we were about to invest $2 million in infrastructure there. Your report warned us about political instability that would make the investment untenable. 3 months later, there was a coup. We would have lost everything." I remembered writing that report, analyzing intelligence sources I still had access to through my network of former colleagues. "The cybersecurity recommendations," David continued, "the supply chain vulnerability assessments, the risk analysis for the Eastern European expansion, it was all you." Over 8 years, I'd essentially been running the international strategy for Thomas's company while hiding behind a consulting firm identity. Every major decision, every successful expansion, every avoided disaster had been shaped by intelligence and analysis I'd provided anonymously. "Why didn't Thomas tell me?" David asked. "Because it would have compromised everything," I said quietly. "My security clearance, his business relationships, our marriage. It was safer for everyone if I remained invisible." David leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. "Do you have any idea how much value you added to this company? The contracts we won because of your insights, the disasters we avoided because of your warnings, you saved us millions. You made U.S. millions." He pulled out another document evaluation report from the company's accountants. "Based on the decisions we made using your analysis, conservatively, you increased the company's value by approximately $12 million over 8 years. The number hung in the air between us. $12 million in value creation. All of it attributed to Thomas's business acumen rather than my strategic intelligence." "I don't want recognition," I said. "Thomas is gone. The company is his legacy, but it's your legacy too," David insisted. "You built the success as much as he did. His strengths were in technology and relationships. Your strengths were in understanding the global landscape that made our international expansion possible, He stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. I have a proposition for you. Thomas's will gives you 40% ownership in the company. I've been assuming you'd want to sell your shares and walk away, but what if you didn't? What if you took an active role? I don't know anything about running a business, I protested. You know everything about the part of the business that matters? Most international strategy and risk assessment. You've been doing it for 8 years. You just haven't been getting credit for it. The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. For 8 years, I'd influenced major business decisions. From the shadows, the prospect of stepping into the light, of claiming credit for my contributions, felt both liberating and overwhelming. I need time to think about it, I said. Of course. But Isabelle, you've been invisible for too long. It's time for people to see what you're capable of when you're not hiding. The cybersecurity recommendations, David continued. The supply chain vulnerability assessments, the risk analysis for the Eastern European expansion, it was all you. Over 8 years, I'd essentially been running the international strategy for Thomas's company while hiding behind a consulting firm identity. Every major decision, every successful expansion, every avoided disaster had been shaped by intelligence and analysis I'd provided anonymously. Why didn't Thomas tell me? David asked. We could have, because it would have compromised everything, I said quietly. My security clearance, his business relationships, our marriage. It was safer for everyone if I remained invisible. David leaned back in his chair, running his hands through his hair. Do you have any idea how much value you added to this company? The contracts we won because of your insights, the disasters we avoided because of your warnings, you saved us millions. You made us millions. He pulled out another document evaluation report from the company's accountants. Based on the decisions we made using your analysis conservatively, you increased the company's value by approximately $12 million over 8 years. The number hung in the air between us. $12 million in value creation. All of it attributed to Thomas's business acumen rather than my strategic intelligence. I don't want recognition, I said. Thomas is gone. The company is his legacy. But it's your legacy too, David insisted. You built this success as much as he did, more in some ways. His strengths were in technology and relationships. Your strengths were in understanding the global landscape that made our international expansion possible. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. I have a proposition for you. Thomas's will gives you 40% ownership in the company. I've been assuming you'd want to sell your shares and walk away. But what if you didn't? What if you took an active role? I don't know anything about running a business, I protested. You know everything about the part of the business that matters most, international strategy and risk assessment. You've been doing it for 8 years, you just haven't been getting credit for it. He turned back to face me. The board meeting is next week. We're discussing the company's future direction, whether to expand into new markets or consolidate existing operations. I'd like you to be there, not as Thomas's widow, but as the strategic mind that's been guiding our international success. The idea terrified and excited me in equal measure. For 8 years, I'd influenced major business decisions from the shadows. The prospect of stepping into the light, of claiming credit for my contributions, felt both liberating and overwhelming. Need time to think about it? I said. Of course. But Isabelle, David paused at the conference room door. You've been invisible for too long. It's time for people to see what you're capable of when you're not hiding. That evening, I sat in Thomas's study, surrounded by the evidence of my hidden corporate career. Reports I'd written, strategies I'd developed, analyses that had shaped millions of dollars in business decisions. For 8 years, I'd been the secret weapon behind a successful company's international expansion. The question now was whether I was ready to step out of the shadows and claim my place in the world I'd helped create. Thomas's mother asked me to meet her at the family estate on a gray Saturday afternoon in late October. When I arrived, she led me not to the formal living room where we'd always conducted our strained interactions, but to a smaller, more intimate study I'd never seen before. The room was lined with bookshelves and family photographs. But what caught my attention immediately was a framed black and white photograph sitting prominently on the desk. A young woman in military uniform, her bearing unmistakably professional, her expression serious and determined. That's me, Thomas's mother said quietly, following my gaze. Second Lieutenant Patricia Hartwell, Army Nurse Corps, 1968. I stared at the photograph, then at the woman beside me, trying to reconcile the elegant society matron I'd known for 8 years with the crisp military officer in the frame. You served, I said, and it wasn't a question. 2 tours in Vietnam, she confirmed. Settling into the chair behind the desk, field hospital, trauma surgery support. I saw things, did things that I've never spoken about to anyone in this family. She gestured for me to sit in the chair across from her, and for the first time since I'd known her, the space between us felt collaborative rather than adversarial. When I married Thomas's father, I made the same choice you made. I buried my military service, created a new identity as the perfect corporate wife. It was 1972 and Vietnam was unpopular. Being a veteran, especially a female veteran, was more liability than asset in his social circles. I studied her face, seeing new lines and depths I'd never noticed before. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I've been the worst kind of hypocrite," she said with brutal honesty. "I spent 8 years judging you for being what I thought was a shallow decoration, when I was exactly what you were, veteran, hiding in plain sight." She opened the desk drawer and withdrew a small wooden box, similar to the one Sergeant Williams had brought me. Inside was a Bronze Star medal, tarnished with age, but unmistakably official. "Meritorious service during the Tet Offensive," she said simply. "I saved 17 soldiers during a surprise attack on our field hospital. Worked for 36 hours straight performing emergency surgeries while the facility was under enemy fire." The medal lay between us like a confession. I thought of all the times she'd dismissed my opinions. All the moments she'd treated me like I couldn't possibly understand the complexities of the world. "You knew," I said suddenly. "When you saw my military bearing, my posture, the way I carried myself, you recognized it because you'd been there." "I suspected," she admitted. "There were little things. The way you stood during the national anthem at baseball games, how you instinctively assessed exits when you entered new rooms, the fact that you never seemed impressed by wealth or status symbols." She paused, but I convinced myself I was imagining it. "Why?" Her laugh was bitter. "Because if you were military, if you were accomplished, if you had sacrificed as much as I suspected you had, then my treatment of you was unconscionable. It was easier to believe you were what I pretended to be than to acknowledge you were what I actually was." She stood and walked to the window, her posture suddenly revealing hints of the military discipline she'd hidden for decades. "I was jealous," she continued. "Jealous that you might have the courage to be authentic in a way I never managed. Jealous that Thomas might love you for your real self instead of your performed self. You didn't fail," I said softly. "You adapted. You survived. You built a life." "I built a lie," she corrected. "A beautiful, successful, empty lie. Do you know that Thomas's father never knew about my military service? I was married to him for 43 years, and he died believing I'd been a secretary before we met." The weight of her confession settled over us. 2 women, 2 generations, both veterans who had chosen love over authenticity and spent decades paying the price. "When I saw that general salute you at Thomas's funeral," she said, returning to her chair, "I felt something I hadn't experienced in 50 years, pride. Not in my son's choice of wife, but in the recognition that someone like me, someone like Uswas, finally being acknowledged." She reached across the desk and took my hands in hers, and I felt the calluses that no amount of expensive hand cream could completely erase. "I want to make amends, Isabelle, not just for my family's treatment of you, but for my own cowardice. In not standing up for what you represented, you deserved to have an ally who understood what you'd sacrificed. Instead, you had an enemy who was too afraid of her own buried truth to recognize yours." Outside, the autumn light was fading, casting long shadows across the study where 2 veterans finally met as equals. The letter arrived on official government letterhead 3 weeks after my conversation with Thomas's mother. I stared at the return address Department of Defense, Strategic Intelligence Division for a full minute before opening it. "Hartwell, your recent declassification and the subsequent media attention regarding Operation Sandglass has brought your expertise to our attention. We are currently developing a new civilian advisory position focused on international threat assessment and strategic intelligence analysis for defense contractors working in sensitive regions. This position would allow you to utilize your unique combination of military intelligence background and private sector experience while maintaining civilian status. We believe your background makes you uniquely qualified for this position." I read the letter twice, then set it down and walked to the kitchen to make coffee with hands that were surprisingly steady. For the first time in 8 years, someone was offering me work that matched my actual qualifications rather than my assumed limitations. The phone rang before I could finish processing the implications. "Isabelle, it's General Morrison, I assume. You've received the letter from Strategic Intelligence? You recommended me." "I did more than recommend you. I helped design the position specifically for someone with your background. The department has been struggling with the gap between military intelligence and civilian defense contracting. Too often, classified insights that could prevent disasters never make it to the people who need them." I thought about the 8 years I'd spent bridging that exact gap for Thomas's company, translating military Intelligence insights into business strategies that had saved millions of dollars and prevented costly mistakes. It would mean being visible again, I said. No more hiding, no more pretending to be someone I'm not. Is that a problem? For 8 years, invisibility had been my protection. But now, sitting in the house where I'd learned to make myself smaller, I realized that invisibility had also been my prison. No, I said finally. I think I'm ready to be seen. The next day I called David Brennan and accepted his offer to take an active role in Thomas's company. The day after that, I responded to the Department of Defense, requesting a meeting to discuss the advisory position, but first, I had one more conversation to complete. Thomas's family gathered in the living room where this all began, where General Morrison's salute had shattered 8 years of carefully maintained fiction. This time, instead of standing before them as the accused, I sat among them as an equal. I've been offered opportunities, I began, that will require me to reclaim my professional identity completely. No more hiding, no more I am consulting, no more pretending that my insights come from luck rather than training. Nodded approvingly. Good. It's time. But I want you to understand what that means for the family reputation, for Thomas's legacy, for the way people will perceive our marriage. His brother leaned forward. What do you mean? People will know that Thomas was married to a decorated military officer? They'll know that his business success was built partly on strategic intelligence provided by someone with classified access to international threat assessments. Catherine spoke up from her chair by the window. Let them know. Let everyone know. We should have been proud to be connected to you instead of ashamed of what we didn't understand. There might be media attention, I continued. Questions about how much of Thomas's success was actually my contribution. Classified work I can't discuss. Bring it on, his mother said firmly. This family has hidden from the truth long enough. That evening, I sat in Thomas's study and composed 3 letters. The first was to the Department of Defense, accepting the advisory position. The second was to David Brennan, outlining my vision for the company's future international strategy. The third was to the editor of the Washington Herald, agreeing to a follow-up interview about my transition from hidden veteran to public advocate. As I sealed the envelopes, I caught sight of my reflection in the window glass. For the first time in 8 years, I looked like myself, confident, purposeful, ready to claim space in the world rather than apologize for occupying it. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of becoming fully visible again. Tonight, I allowed myself to grieve the woman I'd been and celebrate the woman I was becoming. The memorial service was scheduled for a warm Sunday in November, 6 months after Thomas's funeral. This time, however, we'd built in private, finally acknowledged in public. The venue was the same chapel where we'd been married 8 years earlier, but the guest list was dramatically different. Military personnel in dress uniforms sat beside defense contractors and government officials. Veterans I'd served with shared pews with business leaders who'd benefited from my strategic analysis. General, her voice carrying the authority that had commanded rooms full of generals and now commanded a chapel full of people learning to see me clearly for the first time, and civilian contexts, she began. Thomas Hartwell built technologies that protect our forces overseas. Together, they created a model for how military expertise can guide civilian innovation. The memorial plaque we unveiled that afternoon was mounted near the chapel entrance, where everyone entering would see it. Bronze letters spelled out both our names, with a simple inscription in recognition of their combined service to country and community. 2008 to 2025, their partnership protected lives, guided innovation, and demonstrated that love and duty can strengthen each other. After the ceremony, people approached me with stories I'd never heard before. A young entrepreneur whose company had avoided bankruptcy because Thomas's firm had chosen to invest in them based on my risk assessment. A retired colonel who remembered briefings I'd given that had shaped his unit's deployment strategy. A Gold Star mother whose son's life had been saved by intelligence operations I'd supported. David Brennan pulled me aside as the reception was winding down. I have something for you, he said, producing an envelope marked personal and confidential. Inside was a letter from Thomas, dated just weeks before his death. My dearest Isabelle, if you're reading this, then David has finally given you the letter I asked him to hold until you were ready to reclaim your full identity. I've watched you sacrifice so much of yourself for our marriage, and while I've treasured every moment of our life together, I've also grieved for the remarkable woman you were before you learned to hide your light. I want you to know that every business success, every strategic victory, every obstacle we navigated together was enhanced by your intelligence and insight. You made me a better businessman, a better strategic thinker, and a better man. I'm leaving you everything not because you need it, but because you earned it. But more than that, I'm leaving you with my blessing to become visible again, to use your extraordinary talents in service of something larger than our private happiness, Be brilliant again, my love. Be powerful again. Be yourself again. With all my love and admiration, Thomas. I read the letter twice, through tears, then folded it carefully and slipped it into my purse next to the challenge coin from my former unit and the condolence card from General Morrison. Thomas's mother appeared at my elbow as I composed myself. He knew, didn't he? Even better than we did. He knew everything, I said, and he loved me anyway. No, she corrected gently. He loved you because of everything, just like we're learning too. As the sun set behind the chapel windows, I stood, surrounded by people who finally saw me, completely military officer and grieving widow, strategic analyst and loving wife, decorated veteran and wealthy inheritor. For the first time since my wedding day, I felt whole. The woman who had entered this chapel 8 years ago as Captain Hartwell, pretending to be nobody special, was leaving as Major Hartwell, ready to be everything she'd always been. The hiding was over. The real work could finally begin. Adjusting my civilian business suit before a video conference with defense contractors, on my desk sat a framed photograph, a new military portrait taken 6 months earlier in it. I wear my dress uniform for the first time in nearly a decade, every ribbon and medal finally displayed with pride. The Bronze Star from Operation Sandglass sits prominently among them, no longer hidden but worn openly as a testament to the lives saved. Major Hartwell. My assistant's voice came through the intercom. The contractors are online and ready for your briefing. Thank you, I'll be right there. The video conference went smoothly. 3 major defense contractors listened attentively. As I walked them through risk assessments that combined classified intelligence insights with practical business concerns, they treated my expertise with the respect it deserved. After the call, I had lunch with Catherine, who had become a genuine friend over the past year. We met near the Pentagon, where she updated me on her volunteer work with military spouses. Thomas would be so proud of you, she said. Seeing you confident, successful, making a difference, he would love knowing his death freed you to become fully yourself again. I think he always knew this day would come, I replied. He just gave me the space to get here in my own time.
That evening, I attended a reception honoring female veterans who had transitioned successfully to civilian leadership roles. I found myself talking with a young Air Force veteran struggling to find her place in the civilian world. I don't know how to explain what I did without revealing classified information, she confided. Remember that your value isn't just in what you do, it's in how you think, how you solve problems, how you handle pressure. I told her. You start by proving it to yourself. You've already done harder things than anything the civilian world will ask of you. As I drove home that night, I reflected on my journey. From decorated military officer to hidden trophy wife to public advocate, each phase had taught me something essential about resilience and authenticity. That the house felt different now, less like a mausoleum and more like a launching pad. Thomas's photos still graced the mantelpiece, but they shared space with my military commendations and pictures from veteran advocacy events. My phone buzzed with messages, a text from General Morrison about my promotion, an email from David about approved international expansion, a note asking if I'd speak at a school about heroes. I smiled and typed back, "Tell them that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is save lives you'll never meet." The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to use my skills in service of something larger than myself. I was no longer Captain Hartwell, pretending to be nobody. I was no longer Major Hartwell hiding behind a false identity. I was simply Isabelle, complex, accomplished, visible, and finally, completely, authentically myself. The general's salute at Thomas's funeral had shattered a carefully constructed lie and revealed an inconvenient truth. But sometimes inconvenient truths are exactly what the world needs to see. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop hiding and let people witness what you're actually capable of accomplishing. The most important life I'd saved might have been my own, deserved. After the call ended, I had lunch with Catherine, who had become not just an ally but a genuine friend over the past year. We met at a small restaurant near the Pentagon, where she updated me on her volunteer work with military spouses, and I shared stories from my latest consulting projects. "Thomas would be so proud of you," she said over dessert. "Seeing you like this, confident, successful, making a difference. He would love knowing that his death freed you to become fully yourself again." "I think he always knew this day would come," I replied. "He just gave me the space to get here in my own time." That evening, I attended a reception at the Army-Navy Club honoring female veterans who had transitioned successfully to civilian leadership roles. The room buzzed with conversations between women who understood the unique challenges of translating military skills into civilian success while navigating a world that often underestimated their capabilities. I found myself talking with a young Air Force veteran who had recently left active duty and was struggling to find her place in the civilian world. "I don't know how to explain what I did without revealing classified information," she confided. "My resume looks empty, but I can't fill in the blanks." "It's difficult," I agreed. "But remember that your value isn't just in what you did, in how you think, how you solve problems, how you handle pressure. Those skills translate to everything." "But how do you prove that to employers who don't understand military experience?" I thought about my own journey, the 8 years of hiding followed by the gradual reclamation of my professional identity. You start by proving it to yourself. You remember that you've already done harder things than anything the civilian world will ask of you. And you find allies, other veterans, understanding employers, mentors who can help translate your experience into language civilians understand. She nodded thoughtfully. "How long did it take you to feel comfortable being visible again?" "I'm still learning," I admitted, "but every day gets easier. Every time someone recognizes the value of military experience, it makes space for the next veteran to step forward." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the strange journey that had brought me to this point. From decorated military officer to hidden trophy wife to public advocate for veteran transitions, each phase had taught me something essential about resilience, authenticity, and the courage required to claim space in the world. The house felt different now, less like a mausoleum to a buried identity, and more like a launching pad for future possibilities. Thomas's photos still graced the mantelpiece, but they shared space with my military commendations, business awards, and pictures from veteran advocacy events. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat in the study where I'd once hidden my dog tags, beneath pearls and diamonds. Now those same tags hung openly on a display stand beside my desk. A daily reminder of who I'd always been underneath the carefully constructed facade. My phone buzzed with a text from General Morrison. "Saw the news about your promotion to Senior Strategic Advisor. Well deserved. The military is lucky to have your continued service, even in civilian capacity." Another message followed from David Brennan. "Board meeting went great. International expansion approved unanimously. Your risk assessment was exactly what they needed to hear. Thomas would be thrilled." A third message came from Margaret Stevens, the mother whose son I'd helped save during Operation Sandglass. "My granddaughters are doing a school project about heroes. May I tell them about you?" I smiled and typed back, "Of course. Tell them that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is save lives that you'll never meet and protect people who will never know your name." As I prepared for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and saw something I hadn't seen in years: a woman completely comfortable with every aspect of her identity: military officer and business leader, strategic analyst and grieving widow, decorated veteran and passionate advocate. The transformation was complete, but the work was just beginning. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to use my skills in service of something larger than myself. There would be veterans to mentor, businesses to advise, threats to assess, and lives to protect. I was no longer Captain Hartwell pretending to be a nobody. I was no longer Major Hartwell hiding behind a false identity. I was simply Isabelle, complex, accomplished, visible, and finally, completely, authentically myself. The general's salute at Thomas's funeral had shattered a carefully constructed lie and revealed an inconvenient truth. But sometimes inconvenient truths are exactly what the world needs to see. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop hiding and let people witness what you're actually capable of accomplishing. In the morning, I would put on my business suit, review my intelligence briefings, and continue the work of protecting lives and guiding decisions. But tonight, I allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction, remembering the woman who had once saved 347 lives, and realizing that the most important life she'd saved might have been her own.